Good morning. I'm Mina Al-Oraibi, Editor-in-Chief of The National, here in New York, right outside the UN building. I've got with me Damien McElroy, our London Bureau Chief, and Joyce Karam, Washington, D.C. Correspondent.
Good morning.
Morning.
Because this is our last Facebook Live for this year from the UN, we thought the three stars of the show would turn up for you. So we're going to do a quick rundown of what yesterday and today are looking like, but then we'll also think about the whole week. It's been quite the week, lots of coverage from the National. So as we speak, we've got Secretary of State Mike Pompeo heading to a meeting with Adel Jubeir, Saudi Foreign Minister.
Mm-hmm.
Joyce, this meeting was not previously announced. What are we expecting? What are the latest developments?
And this is the second meeting in less than 24 hours. I think it's after Jubeir's speech yesterday, after what we heard from the Americans, it seems countering Iran is big on the table and they want to coordinate moves closely with Saudi Arabia. So we'll see what they say after the meeting, but it seems Iran, the Iran strategy, the new strategy that Jubeir welcomed yesterday is a big integral part of the U.S.-Saudi coordination at the moment.
And you covered Jubeir's speech at the UN yesterday. What were the highlights from that speech? What was the Saudi message to the world?
I thought it was interesting that he opened with the Palestinian issue. He affirmed the 1967 borders, and he was clear that his country won't accept anything less than East Jerusalem as capital. This comes as we're talking about a U.S. plan for the peace process, and I thought Jubeir's position was very much, boosting Mahmoud Abbas. The other stuff countering Iran, calling for a political solution in Yemen. Bless you.
Thank you.
This is we've heard before, but I also thought it was interesting. He brought forth the Saudi efforts and UAE efforts in the Ethiopia-Eritrea peace agreement signed recently in Jeddah, that puts the whole, how we view the Gulf, how we view the
Saudi
diplomatic
diplomacy
role, in that region is very interesting, I thought.
And there was another breakthrough here this week when the Saudi and German foreign minister met and they seemed to bury the hatchet. So that was also quite positive.
Yeah, it's been a big week for Mr. Jubeir and Saudi diplomacy. They've had to engage a lot with the Americans.
Yeah.
There's a big framework for regional diplomacy now that seems to be forming. And yeah, they've looked to settle issues that were hanging around. So they had a good meeting, we're told, with the Germans.
Yeah.
It's still an outstanding issue, I think, with the Canadians, but we'll see what happens there. And yeah, it's been busy and he's been doing a lot of things.
Now, this whole, before we came to the end, it wasn't clear how serious this whole Middle East strategic alliance that the US wants to put together, which is basically the 5 countries of the Gulf, the 6 countries of the Gulf, plus the Jordanians and the Egyptians with the Americans to have this Middle East strategic alliance. So, yeah. Damien, how significant were the meetings this week in terms of impacting the Mesa file?
It's very significant because the Americans have put a lot of weight behind it. They've clearly drawn the outline of what they want, and they've had the big meeting to launch it. So they've said, this is what we want to do. Obviously, there's lots of modalities to work out. There's lots of what would it actually do.
Yeah.
And that'll probably take some time. But the overall concept is now there, and the focus on Iran is one thing, but it's only one thing, and in the long term it could actually just be one of 4 or 5 facets of this. So stay posted. There's a lot to watch on this.
This week has been a lot about Iran and the US's position towards Iran and the need to push back against Iran, and then last night we got the surprise announcement of the US closing down its consulate in Basra and talking about security threats. And there are concerns that we've seen before where there's this push against Iran and then suddenly the dynamics on the ground are different. And it's interesting because the timing of it is just within a few days of having this big Trump speech of saying, we're going to push back on them. And pushing back on Iran's activities in the region is an integral part of this US strategy. And then they pull out of Iraq. So I think it's left quite a few people scratching their heads in terms of that American commitment.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, it doesn't look good that Iran is threatening U.S. interests in Iraq, and okay, we're gonna pack and leave. But on the other, I don't think the administration wants a repeat of Benghazi or other tragic incidents that happened in the region, and it remains to be seen how this team in particular responds. I mean, we're talking about some the team of very hawkish figures in the administration, Bolton, Pompeo, Hook, others. These are people who have come out publicly and said, we put Iran on notice. Does the story stop here, that they're packing and leaving from Basra? I doubt it will. On the other hand, Iran is the one that holds leverage in Iraq, as you know better than all of us, Mina. So it's not gonna be pretty. It's not gonna be easy, and I don't know what it means for Iraq itself.
Iraq doesn't have a government, and when it does have a government, it has a big recovery job to do, because this is a very significant thing that's just happened. It makes Iraq look a bit like a playground. And in terms of big power politics, the next government will really have to try and prove that this will be tackled at some stage.
Right, and that they actually can be a sovereign state that doesn't get squashed in this ongoing battle. Okay, so I mean, the Russians, the Chinese are still very significant on the world stage. We hear less from them this week. I mean, in part because here you had President Donald Trump, and they were just represented with their foreign ministers. But Lavrov did give his speech yesterday, and kind of like the Russian position and all this, but also the Chinese. Damien, update us on their role.
Well, very rarely does Russia these days criticize the Trump administration or America in sort of principle terms. Lavrov did that. He basically drew a line against the unilateralism of the Trump administration, including in the Middle East peace process. So we saw something quite robust from the Russians. They were speaking out against how President Trump is conducting himself in a few areas. They were also really trying to grab Syria and say it's ours, and we own the process by which the talks in Geneva are going to go through, and they were trying to give de Mistura some more time rather than America's push to get it up and running quite quickly. And the Chinese too were basically saying, we've got our agenda, our platform is just as big as yours, and don't get into trade wars because you'll be the loser. So both of them were robust. They stood up to America and they set out their own visions, which isn't the vision that's coming out of the White House.
And trade wars really did cast a shadow here. I mean, you had the Canadians, and Trudeau almost avoided Trump in its entirety because he didn't want to have this play out here at the UN. Had, like you said, the Chinese addressed it. So, but nothing changed on that agenda here at the UN. I guess it's not the platform, but also, the Americans have already laid out their vision, as have the Chinese. And
the clock is ticking. There's only a few weeks really to get the Canadians into this reformed NAFTA. Though Mr. Trump won't use the word NAFTA, he told us. So that's, there's a bad dynamic there, and it doesn't seem like the Canadians have figured out how to prevent that.
Right, so still coming up today, of course, we have the UAE Foreign Minister addressing the UN General Assembly. We have the Syrians addressing the General Assembly, Bahrain, and of course, a whole host of other countries. This actually doesn't end today. They continue until Monday, but we will be wrapping up our coverage predominantly today and tomorrow as world leaders go back. But before we wrap up this Facebook Live, I wanted to ask you, what event or what development in the last week here at the UN do you think will impact the foreign policy agenda on the world stage in the next 12 months? Joyce?
Less the foreign policy agenda in the next 12 months and more the situation in the Middle East. I thought the Israeli Prime Minister speech holds a lot of worrisome signals on what Israel could do next, holding targets, pointing at Beirut, and threatening Iraq even.
He almost did a list of like possible strike targets.
Is new. So will we see more Israeli military action, covert or overt, against Iranian targets across the region? That's a big thing to watch for me personally.
Yeah, the irony of at the UN, you can actually hold up satellite images of places that you could potentially strike, and the rest of the world's like nodding and carries on. Damien, for you, what was the one?
I thought it was the Trump speech. I thought it really laid out how he's going to conduct America for the next 3, 5, 8 years.
Yeah.
And I thought we had yesterday the Chinese and Russian responses. So we've really seen the lines drawn now about how countries will act and where their interests are. And I think the developments like the Mesa talks and what we've seen talked about on the Middle East peace process are really significant, because the US, the White House, it's gone to the table, it's torn everything up, it's doing it its own way, and other countries are just going to have to decide if they fall in or obstruct. And that's what we're going to see for the next, as I say, 1 term or 2 terms.
Yeah. I mean, Antonio Guterres announced that he'll be holding a climate summit next September. And I think the climate agenda has really been missing from all of this. But for me, that is probably the non-event that will impact us in not the 12 months, but in the coming years. And it's actually really worrying that the climate agenda has completely fallen off the table. So we'll have to see if Guterres can actually ramp up support for the climate agenda in the coming 12 months. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please follow all our coverage at www.thenational.ae. And thank you, Damien, Joyce. This has been fun. And thank you to Willie, who has been amazing finding locations for us, getting us all sorted out. So good job, Willie. Thanks, everyone.